From a particularly nasty combo to another detachment review for the new Aeldari, this time we are looking at the Spirit Conclave, which is the detachment you'll be using if you love all of those gorgeous Wraith units, and it can be a good pick if you are grabbing the new Combat Patrol to get that Spirit Seer and those Wraith Guard models, because they are going to be very key components of building a list around this detachment. Now overall a few things did change for the Wraith units in the new codex. The generic Wraith Guard and Wraith Blades did catch a slight nerf, dropping to toughness 6 instead of toughness 7, and they also lost a few points of leadership, going to a fairly rubbish 8+ instead of a 6+. They also cannot come in units of 10 anymore, they are capped to 5. However, they did get a tiny bit cheaper to make up for that, both the Blades and the Guard coming in at 170 points instead of 180, so that does help a little bit. The Wraith Knight also got very nicely a separated datasheet, so the melee and ranged variant are two separate options now, meaning you could in theory bring 6 Wraith Knights to a game, although at 420 points for the melee option or 435 for the regular one, that isn't very likely to happen. They are still perhaps a tiny bit overcosted for what they do, I think, but they are of course very, very scary. 2d6 devastating wounds on the heavy Wraith Cannon, or a flat 6 damage on the Ghost Glaive, so they can do a lot of work, but you definitely do pay for it. In terms of the detachment itself, you do get some nice, if a little bit counterintuitive bonuses for your Wraith units. Firstly, the main rule, which can be a bit of a pain, is Shepherds of the Dead, and what this does is that whenever an Asuryani Psyker from your army is destroyed, then the enemy unit that destroyed it gets a Vengeful Dead token, and then any Wraith Construct model from your army that targets an enemy with one of those markers gets +1 to hit and to wound. So they're essentially like better judgment tokens for the Votann really, and they can bring a huge improvement to the output of your unit. Wraith Guard will now be hitting on 3s, whilst your Wraith Knight can be hitting on 2s with potentially 2d3 strength 20 shots. The main downside of this of course is that a Psyker unit from your army has to die. And now don't get me wrong, you probably will have a fair few Psyker units in your army between your Farseers and Warlocks and your Spirit Seers, especially the latter in this detachment, but they're kind of important and you don't really want them to be dying. So it is sort of more of a softening the blow of some bad news rather than an ability that will just make your army stronger from the get-go. So it can feel a little bit annoying, but I think when it does proc and you get a few enemy units with those tokens on, it is going to make your units hit very, very hard indeed. The second part of the detachment rule, however, does bring a very welcome buff, although again you could argue it's a bit feels bad because it's maybe less exciting than you would want, because it basically just grants your Wraith units the army rule. So it brings your army rule of battle focus to your Wraith Blades, your Wraith Guard and your Wraith Lord. So yeah, it's not giving you anything new, it is just now not preventing you from accessing something that everything else in your army can. So as I said, it can be a bit feels bad, but I would say to counter that, battle focus is incredibly good on your Wraith units. So getting your Wraith Guard an extra 2 inches of movement, or the ability to move d6 + 1 inches after they've been shot, or just avoiding Overwatch on things like your Wraith Blades as they move up the board is fantastically powerful, and it will make a significant difference to your Wraith models when they are within 12 inches of a Psyker. The final bonus is just another really nice extra one. It brings the battle line keyword to your Wraith Guard and your Wraith Blades, so it's just a nice extra little rule to have, being able to bring a few more units of them if you did want to go full Wraith, and also having some nice handy bonuses when it comes to some rules and secondaries in the current 40k season. It is just a good utility rule to have. And I mean, I would say all round, it is a fairly decent detachment rule. It can feel a bit underwhelming in terms of needing your stuff to die to get the benefits, and then just returning your own army rule, I get that. But for your Wraith units specifically, I think it will be quite a significant boost to them, and it is definitely going to make a Wraith-themed army feel very powerful as the game progresses and both sides start to take more and more casualties. In terms of your enhancements in this detachment, there are a few reasonably good options and a few that I think are a bit less exciting. In general, I think they're a bit overcosted. The Light of Clarity is up first, and this looks to be a whopping 40 points. I think this must be getting a drop. I'm still using the Codex points for these. I haven't seen any updates to those like we've seen for the main datasheet units yet, but the Light of Clarity lets you pick a Wraith construct unit within 12 inches of a Spirit Seer who has this, and they get +1 to their OC, or +3 if it is a monster unit. So your Wraith Guard will be an extra 5 OC, whilst your Wraith Lords will be sitting on a hefty 6 OC. And don't get me wrong, that isn't bad. It will massively help you take some objectives from an enemy. I just personally can't really see that being worth 40 points. Maybe 20 or 25, but as it stands, this feels way too expensive for me. Maybe I just don't value OC enough, because I guess this is exponentially better on things like your Wraith Blades and Wraith Guard, who are a base OC of 1, but I do just, in the end of the day, think this is a tad too pricey for my liking. The Stave of Kurnos is a much cheaper 10 points. This goes on a Spirit Seer again, and in fact all of these enhancements only go on a Spirit Seer. This grants you the ability to pick a Wraith construct unit in your command phase within 12 inches of the bearer, but not Titanic units, so no Wraith Knight, and the unit gets precision on their critical wounds. So now some of your scarier heavy weapons like the Wraith Guard's cannons can now be a bit more reliable at picking out characters and just utterly obliterating them with their good strength, good AP, and D6+1 damage profile. So this is a pretty solid enhancement, and it's very, very easy to fit in at that cheap 10 points. The Rune of Mists is also quite pricey at 30 points. This enhancement also lets you pick a Wraith construct unit wholly within 12 inches of the bearer in your command phase, but this time they get the benefit of cover against any ranged attacks from outside 18 inches. Now, I will say that's not bad. It can make your Wraith Guard and your Wraith Blades super durable with toughness 6, 3 wounds and a 2-up save, and ignoring a Pip of Rend thanks to the cover, but it's only outside of 18 inches. And it's 30 points. If this was just against any shooting going into them, I could see this being worth 30, but the reality is your guys want to get into that range because your guns for the Wraith Guard are 18 inches, and your Wraith Blades, well, they just want to get into melee anyway. So this is really only going to protect your unit for a turn, maybe 2 if you're lucky. And to me, that just doesn't seem worth a whole 30-point investment. I think it's a good ability. Granting the benefits of cover to a unit is very strong. I just wish it didn't have that 18-inch caveat. It would still be good, I think, but not oppressive in the slightest if it was just any ranged attack into them, or, you know, make it 6 inches or 12 inches if you really wanted to give a limitation to it. The final enhancement is the 35 point higher duty. Once per turn, your Spirit Seer and his unit can make a normal move of up to 6 inches when an enemy unit ends a move, advance, or fallback move within 9 inches of them. So this is nice. It can help keep a unit of Wraith Guard away from an enemy that wants to charge them and tie them up in combat, or you can use it to get a bit closer to an enemy with your Wraith Blades, or just get onto an objective or behind some cover if you need it. So it is a very solid tool. I just think, again, is that a bit too expensive for what it does? Reactionary moves do have a lot of value, but I think I would probably see this at maybe 25 points, maybe 30. I just feel that 35 is a bit too expensive for what it brings. Now again, all 4 of these may change with some updated points like we've seen with the main datasheets, but for now, I just feel like they're a little bit of a dud. They're not awful abilities by any stretch, they are just very expensive for what they bring to your army at present. Now on to the stratagems. The stratagems for this detachment are all a nice cheap 1 command point, and they start with the Seer's Eye. This is done in your shooting or fight phase, and it lets you pick a Psyker unit and a Wraith construct unit within 12 inches of them, and then you pick an enemy unit visible to your Psyker unit, and your Wraith unit can ignore any modifiers to AP or damage for their attacks. And that means no armor of contempt or any damage reduction abilities or stratagems or enhancements. So this can be very, very strong for making sure your wraith cannons or your ghost swords punch through and kill off your targets as effectively as possible, especially things like the 2 damage on your melee weapons for your wraith blades. Getting -1 damage or anything against those literally halves your output, so being able to ignore that can make a huge difference when it comes to just how much you kill, especially into things like 2 wound marines. You also get Soul Bridge, which is in your command phase. This one lets a Wraith Lord, a Wraith Guard, or a Wraith Blade unit always count as being within 12 inches of a Psyker model that you also choose as part of this stratagem for the purposes of Psychic Guidance and Spirit Guides. Now, these are 2 abilities. One of them, the Spirit Guides, we saw from the Detachment rule, but Psychic Guidance, this is an ability on your Wraith unit that allows them to have a leadership of 6+, so back to what they were before, and also get +1 to hit when they are within 12 inches of a Psyker. So you can basically spread that buff across the board to make sure one of your far away units is still hitting on 3s instead of 4s for a battle round. So that is a fairly solid boost for just 1 command point. Wraithbone armor is a defensive strat you have access to. In the enemy shooting or fight phase, after they've chosen targets, you can pick a non-Titanic Wraith construct unit, and all incoming attacks for the rest of the phase are -1 damage. So the key thing about this that someone kindly pointed out, this isn't just the unit going into them in that activation. After you've used this strat, any subsequent shooting or fighting into them for the rest of the phase is also at -1 damage. So this can do absolute wonders for keeping your already tanky Wraith units alive through even the most powerful enemy attacks from 3 or 4 units. Next up, we have Spirit Token. This allows a Wraith Guard or a Wraith Blade unit at the start of your movement phase to sticky an objective. So it simply stays under your control even if you move off it until the enemy then controls it. This is really good on an army that is likely going to have a fairly low model count, getting you that ever useful ability to keep scoring you points even as you are moving onwards and up the board to get in range of the enemy and start fighting over the midfield. You will still be getting those crucial primary points each turn, so it is a fairly generic but very, very useful strat to keep in mind, especially with this army. Blades from Beyond is done in your fight phase. This lets a Wraith Blades, a Wraith Lord, or a Wraith Knight unit have devastating wounds on their melee weapons. This is already fantastic on things like your Wraith Blades with their weight of attacks. They potentially have 5 attacks per model with their swords. But on a Wraith Knight 2, that can get you 15, Strength 8, -2 AP, 2 damage attacks with devastating wounds, or a frankly even more impressive 5 at Strength 16, -3 AP, and flat 6 damage, which is super, super good. And with those 5 attacks, you have a roughly 55% chance to get at least 1 wound roll of a 6. And that means you're going to have an over 50% chance of getting a flat 6 unsavable damage into a vehicle, a monster, a Primarch. So it is very much worth it when you charge your Wraith Knight into the enemy's biggest, toughest, scariest target. The final strat is Crushing Strides. This is done in your charge phase after a Wraith Blades, a Wraith Lord, or a Wraith Knight unit has made a charge move. You just do some impact hit mortal wounds. But it is actually fairly reliable. You roll 1d6 for each Wraith Blade model in the unit, or a flat 4d6 for a Wraith Lord, or just 6 dice for a Wraith Knight, and then you do the mortal wounds on a 3+. So you should, with average rolling, get a few mortals there. You get around 3 from a 5-man unit of Wraith Blades, or even 4 from the Wraith Knight, which followed up with Blades from Beyond means your Wraith Knight should kill just about anything that it goes into combat with, and it can very, very easily just charge in and kill, you know, a Land Raider or a Primarch or any other big scary monsters really, really well with those, on average, 4 mortal wounds as you're charging in. All in all, I think this detachment has an okay but not stellar detachment rule. The enhancements do leave a lot to be desired, at least until they get their points sorted, I think, but it does have some teeth, and you can make a very mobile army with the battle focus that you get access to, and getting +1 to hit and to wound can really do some very, very nasty things for your unit. It can make them absolutely lethal into pretty much any target in the game. And I would say especially in melee, you do get some exceptionally strong strats to help you punch even harder and then survive even longer when you need to from things like Wraith Bone armor. So it can still work very, very well. And if you want to run a pure Wraith army or even just a mostly Wraith army, this detachment will let you do that in a really thematic and quite powerful way. But as always, I'd love to know what you make of this detachment and which of the Wraith units do you think benefit the most from these rules. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe for more Warhammer content from me, but until next time, I'll catch you later guys.